Why you suck at Total War, reason number 3. You don't get the right matchups. It's all well and good to get to know the units and what they're capable of. It's great to learn all the factions and know how to wield them and defeat them on the battlefield. But all that means absolutely nothing if you don't apply your units correctly and strive to get them the best matchups to make the most of them. Allowing your units to continue to fight in bad matchups is the downfall of most players. This reason may be the most important one of all. Total War is like a massive game of rock, paper, scissors, chess. Everything has a strength and everything has a weakness. You have to apply your strengths to the enemy's weaknesses and prevent them from doing the same thing to you in the process. And every single unit has its own strengths and weaknesses which will determine its role within the army. High Elf Spearmen, fantastic at taking down large units or holding a line against lesser infantry, but high melee attack infantry will run them through. Plague Monk Censer Bearers, fantastic at taking on all kinds of enemy infantry, especially elite heavily armoured ones, but cav charges and missiles can absolutely ruin them due to their low armour. Handgunners, fantastic for blasting down any kind of heavily armoured unit, but if you put them into any kind of melee fight, they will get swiftly stomped. Any unit with quite a bit of speed is going to be a problem for them because they won't be able to get away, such as cavalry and monsters. So when it comes to a battle, it's all about trying to get those strengths into the appropriate weaknesses. Here's a prime example. I've got some Centaurs here, I'm playing as the Beastmen against the Skaven in an online battle, and I'm looking for a target for my Great Weapon Centaurs. I want to get this artillery, but there's some Storm Vermin with halberds there, who are of course anti-large. And with my Centaurs being large, that is a terrible matchup for them, so I need to avoid it. Instead, I've spied myself a tasty little target in some Plague Monk Censer Bearers with their back to me. So let's call them the paper in our rock, paper, scissors analogy. And here comes the scissors, my Centaurs. They're going to absolutely cut through them, pun intended, as the Censer Bearers don't have a lot of armour. So I'm using my strength against the enemy's weakness. But oh scheisse, here comes the rock to my scissors. The halberds have come after me, and if they get a hold of my Centaurs, it's going to be night-night for them. So I'm going to pull them away quickly. They've done their damage to the Censer Bearers, there's no need for them to stick around any longer. They can live to fight another day. That's me applying my strength to the enemy's weakness and avoiding the enemy's strength. So you're just looking to do that all across the battlefield, all of the time. Easy, right? Well, let's get a little bit deeper into the matchups idea. Now every unit is going to have its primary target, something it's designed to do well against. It could also have a secondary target, another type of enemy that it can do pretty well against but it's not really designed for. You don't bring them along for that reason. Take Slayers for example, obviously fantastic against large units and they can take on light infantry pretty well too. But that's not really why they're there, you don't bring them to fight light infantry. And so if you use them to fight light infantry first, or any kind of infantry really, and then try to get them after some large units, they may not be able to perform their primary role as efficiently, and thus you're wasting their talents a little bit. So if they end up fighting infantry, I want to try and pull them away from that fight and get them to go and kill the large units, because if there are large on the battlefield, the Slayers need to sort them out and shouldn't be fighting anyone else until all the large units are dead. That's going to be the most effective use for them. Not always easy or necessarily possible, but that's the idea you should be aiming for. Get everybody into their primary targets, and the more of those primary target matchups you can get, the more chance you have of winning. So another example of this, let's say I've got some Swordmasters, elite infantry killing power, going to be great for taking on any other elite infantry. And let's say there's some Chosen with great weapons coming my way. Now the best thing in my army to deal with them is my Swordmasters, so I want to get them into them, but I need to get them there safely. And then let's say a unit of Chaos Marauders with great weapons comes along and tries to engage my Swordmasters. Now of course, we could engage them and take the Marauders down no problem at all. However, my Swordmasters would take a bit of damage, roughly quarter of their health let's say. That then means that they'll have to go and fight the Chosen with some of their health missing. Does that sound like a good idea to you? Me neither. What I could have done is find someone else to deal with the Chaos Marauders. I could have run back, I could have got some missiles onto them, I could have got some spearmen to fight them, some cavalry, whoever. Just keep my Swordmasters safe so they can take down the Chosen. It's just about trying to get the most effective use out of all of your units. And like I say, this is kind of a deeper concept of matchups. This isn't something that if you're new, you really need to be worrying about too much. I'm just sharing a way that I look at things, make of it what you will. It's also important to realise that you're not always going to be able to get your primary target matchups, and sometimes that's okay. You're going to have winning matchups and losing matchups all across the battlefield all of the time. It's just about making sure that you have more winning matchups than the enemy does. The person that gets more of the small victories will ultimately get the big victory. Now, trying to get the best matchups begins as soon as the battle does. When a battle begins, check out the enemy army. Try to identify their strengths and identify threats to your army. Start with the front line. What's it composed of? How does it match up with your front line? Where are their strongest units? There's 2 units of Haganeth Executioners here. You know they're going to be trouble, so they're a strength. Cold One Dread Knights, a powerful cavalry indeed. Got to watch out for those. And then another one on the other side with a chariot. So we can identify that the strengths are here, over here, and over here. So in the middle and on the flanks. The front line isn't really a problem for us. So we can plan some matchups and see what's coming. I've got 2 units of cavalry here. They could take them on. They may not be able to beat them, so I could send some big uns over as well if they need the help. That should get rid of that, no problem. Over on this side, there's a chariot. We don't have as much over here. Got some big uns and some more cavalry. They can engage them. They may need some extra help though, but for now, that'll have to do. And then we've got those Haganeth Executioners to worry about in the middle. Now, I do have an Orc Shaman with a Foot of Gork spell. That's going to be very powerful at taking off a lot of the health of those Executioners. And then to try and finish them off, I've got some good old Black Orcs. 2 units of Black Orcs, so they can work nicely at taking on those Haganeth Executioners. I've also got some Trolls who are armor piercing, another great unit for taking out heavy infantry. The Trolls aren't necessarily going to be able to beat Haganeth Executioners one-on-one, but they can do plenty of damage to them, making them much more manageable for everyone else. And my front line should be able to take on their front line relatively comfortably. So once I've taken out these strong units, this cavalry, this side, and these Haganeth Executioners, there is really nothing left that this army has. A bunch of Bleak Swords and some Dread Spears will be very easy to deal with by the rest of my army. So I just need to take out those strongest units. Another example, I've got exactly the same Greenskins army, but now I'm faced with a different army and a different threat. Beastmen front line, not up to much, bit of Gore Herd, some missiles back there, Chariot on their left side, and then there is a Giant mixed in here. He could be pretty dangerous, so we might need to watch out for him. But the big danger of this army is on their right side. Minotaurs and Centaurs are going to be a big problem, something I'm going to have to deal with coming down my left side. All this is the threat. Nothing else in that army is really a big deal. Maybe the Giant, wherever he is, he could be a problem. But my biggest worry is that massive attack that's coming down my left-hand side. From all these Minotaurs and Centaurs, they're going to rain down this way, and I'm going to be overpowered on this side because all I've got is a little bit of cavalry, some big uns. They're not going to be able to stop and hold off all of those units. So I'm going to need to send some other units over to support. Now, if we look on the right side, I've only got a chariot to deal with. So I don't really need 2 units over here of cavalry to try and deal with it. I could bring one over to try and help on this side. They can all try and engage those Centaurs maybe. I've got some more big uns over here. They could be useful on this side as well to take on the Minotaurs. So I need to try and match the strength of that side, or I'm going to be heavily outmatched on my left. This is going to be the biggest problem, and if we wipe all this out, if this goes away, all they have is this. Does that look threatening to you? Not really. A little bit of Beastmen infantry, a Giant to deal with, like I said, he could be a problem, but other than that, really nothing to worry about. Find the strength, neutralize it, and you'll have a much easier time with any enemy army. And also note that when I say identify the strengths and threats of an enemy army, it doesn't necessarily mean their strongest or most expensive units. It means which ones are the most dangerous to you, to your army composition. For example, if you're facing Bretonnia, your first thought on their strongest units is going to be their cavalry. Grail Knights, Questing Knights, very dangerous cavalry. However, are they really that dangerous to you if you have a ton of anti-large capabilities in your army? So if you've got a bunch of anti-large spearmen scattered all over your army, it's not very difficult for you to get them in a good matchup fighting that cavalry. You've got the tools for the job to defeat that opponent easily. That's not an issue for you. That isn't going to be hard for you. What is going to be difficult is the things that you're not prepared for, that you don't have the tools for, that you don't have the right units to deal with. That's truly where you need to adapt and figure out how to beat them with what you have. This is really one of the defining skills of a great player, I think. So always check out the enemy army ahead of time so that you can rearrange your army if need be. You may come with a certain build or plan in mind, but if it's going to run you into a bunch of bad matchups, you're going to need to change and adjust. A good Total War player must be adaptable. So whether playing against the AI or another human player, the same rules apply. It's generally harder against a human player because they're trying to do the same thing as you, and the AI very often leaves itself in bad matchups and attacks completely randomly. Now let's go through a quick AI battle and show this in action. So this anti-large cavalry is heading for my Arachnarok. I'm going to put some big uns in the way because they're anti-large, they'll be able to deal with the cavalry and they can protect my Arachnarok. There's 2 elite units here with some executioners and some blackguard. We're going to have to watch out for those and get something over to them. My black orcs could be the best choice to go for that. I do have some trolls as well who could help out there. The front line is witch elves and black ark corsairs. They could be a problem, very powerful damage dealing units. My orc boys may not do so well against them, so maybe I'd be better off using the trolls to help the front line. We may need to get a bit more support to the front line later on, but for an initial engagement, that'll do fine. And then the only thing really left to deal with is some dark shards with shields. Very powerful armor piercing units that could do a lot of damage to my black orcs and things. So I've got some cavalry ready to come around the flank and try and disrupt those to stop them from firing. That pretty much covers everything in this army, so all I have to do is try to get those matchups. So I'm going to send the trolls over to this black ark corsair bunch, try and avoid the witch elves and the spears because they could make us lose control or our anti-large. The Arachnarok is coming over to the same group as well. That's that extra support for the front line I was talking about. As for those 2 elite units, the executioners and the blackguard, I've got one of my black orcs into them. They've taken some damage from a spell, my black orcs, so they're not in the best condition. They may need some support to help beat those blackguard. My other unit of black orcs is on its way over to help fight those executioners, as they're currently fighting orc boys who are going to get destroyed by them. The orc boys are doing a good job of holding the executioners in place though, allowing me to drop a nice foot of Gork spell, which is going to rip off half those executioners' health. And you can see my cavalry coming around the back, ready to destroy those missiles, so I've set myself up to get all the best unit matchups. And then it's a case of keeping eye on all those little matchups and getting support where it's needed. So on this right, I've got Biggins versus Cavalry, that's a win for me. I've got Black Orcs versus Blackguard, that's a win for me. Here, my Black Orcs have just arrived to take on those Hargoneth Executioners. That should be okay, might be a little bit peaky, but for the most part, it is okay, the Lord is around. Here, I'm destroying these Black Ark Corsairs with my Arachnarok, my Trolls and some Orc Boys. But on this far left though, I do have 1 unit of Biggins fighting 3 units, 2 of them Black Ark Corsairs. So that is ultimately going to be a battle I won't win. I will lose over there eventually, and those 3 units will come round, and I need to be ready for that. I'm winning at the back with all my cavalry, but for the most part, I am winning this battle. And to know that, all I need is the power of prediction. I can look at matchups on the battlefield and tell whether I'm going to win or lose. And based on that information, I can attempt to try and counter whatever the enemy is throwing at me. There are a million different variables in Total War, so it's hard to always predict accurately. Now, if we go through these matchups for the Dark Elves, I've got a Hydra fighting Saurus Spears. That is of course a bad matchup because they are anti-large and stabbing up my large. I've got Hargoneth Executioners versus Saurus Warriors. This is a good matchup for me. This is one I'll definitely win. On the right, I've got Black Ark Corsairs fighting Saurus Warriors. This is not really a good matchup for me. This is more of a secondary target for the Black Ark Corsairs. They can take on armor, but they're not going to do a great deal of damage against it because they're not armor piercing. So what do I need to do? Well, this War Hydra needs to get away from the spears. That's for sure. That's a certain. These Executioners, I don't need to do anything. They're fine. I can move on and see who else I need to manage. The Black Ark Corsairs, I could leave them there, knowing full well that they are going to lose eventually, but they will do a good bit of damage. Or you could try to get them some support so that they will eventually win their matchup. So it's quite simply a case of scouring the battlefield, looking whether you're going to win or lose, and then deciding whether to do anything about it. As I've mentioned, it's all about winning these little victories, which will ultimately lead to the big victory. And do be aware of magic also. Magic can be a real game changer that can be cast at any time, anywhere, so 1 second you may be winning a matchup, but then 5 seconds later the foot of Gork gets dropped on someone and now you're losing the matchup. So you've got to stay on top of all your matchups and try to counter as best you can. So a lot of information to take in there, so let's summarize this with a few basic steps you can take when approaching any battle. First of all, identify the threats of the enemy army. And then you need to prepare your attacks and any counters based on how everything is laid out and what matchups you may end up in. You'll then engage the enemy and try to get as many good matchups as possible. And remember, it's okay if you're losing some of those matchups. You can't get all winning matchups all across the battlefield all of the time. Simply watch out for really bad ones. And then as the battle progresses, you just want to keep checking all the matchups and try to counter where possible to put the losing matchups more in your favour. And then to the final step, the most important one of all, win. So there you have most of the information on how to get the right matchups in Total War. To be honest, I could go on for longer on this subject, and it was difficult to choose the right information to give and how to put it across. Hopefully this all makes some sense, and as I say, is probably the most important reason why you may suck at Total War. If you feel you need a little bit more guidance, allow me to finish with a couple of example battles. So I've got myself a High Elf army and I'm approaching the Empire. I figured I'd do these battles against the AI because that's what most people are playing against. The AI doesn't have much of a formation, so you just need to try and arrange yourself to defeat what comes at you. The front line of my High Elves army is all White Lions. I know they're going to have no trouble fighting the Empire infantry, as it's all not that great. The only one that may give me some trouble is these great swords here, so I may need to support those White Lions. Out on the right flank, some Demigryphs have engaged my Silver Helms. That's a terrible matchup for my Silver Helms, so I need to get them away. I've just brought over some spears to help out, so now we've got the Demigryphs sandwiched. So that's going to be a winning matchup for us now that the spears are there. This one's going to be fine. Most of the frontline units aren't going to have any trouble. There's some more cavalry over here. They're charging into some spearmen, stupidly, so that's a good matchup for me. Although those spearmen are fighting swordsmen as well, so that could be lost. I've got my Dragon Princes around the flank getting after the missiles. That is of course going to be a great matchup, and they'll destroy those no problem. The Demigryphs are left fighting these spearmen here, which is a bad matchup for the Demigryphs of course, but that's the AI for you. Same thing on this side still. The cavalry are fighting spearmen, the worst thing they could be fighting. The frontline units have pretty much done their job. They've taken out most of the infantry, and the AI made it easy for us to kill their cavalry. And this battle did begin in favour of the High Elves, as their army composition is better at defeating their enemies than the Empire's was. So it wasn't too difficult to get the right matchups and to win this one, because the advantage was already there. It didn't help that the AI was being stupid with its cavalry and left them fighting spearmen. And then a few rear charges later from the Dragon Princes, and it's all over. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, well done, Zerk. You beat an inferior Empire army with a superior High Elves army. You're a fucking champ. Well done. Alright, let's switch it around then. I'll now play as the exact same Empire army that I just faced, and I'll play against the High Elves army that I just played as. So the compositions are the same, the Empire is disadvantaged in this one. Getting as many good matchups as I can is going to be even more important in these disadvantaged matchups. So first thing we need to do, identify the threats. Well, the White Lions are probably the biggest threat to me, as my infantry isn't great. So I'm going to try and use all the time I can to land some shots on these White Lions with my artillery, whittle them down, make them a little bit more manageable for my front line. The way I've set myself up is just with swordsmen as a front line, so they're definitely going to be inferior to those White Lions. Gonna need some help or they will lose. I can predict that easily. I've got Demigryphs on the left and Reiksguard on the right. As per usual, the AI charges into some bad matchups, into the Halberdiers and the Demigryph Halberds. The Dragon Princes are of course very strong, but they're not really the biggest threat to us. Because we have Demigryphs and Halberds, we can deal with them quite comfortably if we can get hold of them. On the right hand side, I was trying to get my Reiksguard to go after the missiles, but the Dragon gave us a few problems and did some damage. Some Silver Helms nearly got a charge into my frontline swordsmen, but my Halberdiers just caught them. But those Halberdiers have just been caught by a breath attack. There's some White Lions on them and the Silver Helms, and they're routed very quickly. So I'm struggling on this right side. I'm now very exposed. I'm going to need some support over there. The left side is slowly winning, and the front line is holding well enough for now. Going to bring the Great Swords and the General in to try and help out across the front line and do what I can there. I do have my Reiksguard coming around the back to get the missiles now, so I've got a mixture of winning and losing across the battlefield currently. I'm able to find little moments here and there where I can just dish out some extra damage and start to turn the tide in my favour. I've nearly got rid of the Dragon Princes finally, which will free up my Demigryphs and Halberds to get a little bit more work done. The front line has been holding well enough for now, but I'm still going to inevitably lose some of these fights. Going to pull my swordsman back here so the Great Swords can get a better shot at these White Lions, and we can maybe flank round with those swordsmen as well. Karl Franz has routed off a Lawmaster, and I'm now trying to tie up all this stuff on the right so it doesn't come round and overrun me. I've spawned up a Manticore and got some cheap spearmen over that side just to slow them down until I can get more support to that side. There's a million different ways to get a million different things done, but as long as you win those little battles, you will inevitably win the full battle. I'm able to rout off their Lord, which is going to finish off the morale of the rest of the army, and next thing you know, the High Elves are running for the hills. So I've managed to defeat a superior High Elf army by getting as many good matchups as possible, and supporting and countering where I need to. So for the last time, I stress the importance of striving to get the best matchups.